Gwasanaethau bws. Galwaf a Huw Irranca-Davies United Cynnig.
Llwybr Newydd, and can I thank the Business Committee for selecting this motion for debate and the many cross-party members who supported the application too. Buses and properly integrated public transport are clearly very important to the Senedd and to the constituents we serve. Now, no doubt today, some members will have stories to tell of our own local services. Some will be of services lost during or even before the pandemic. Some will be of creative new ways to provide transport solutions, particularly for people who rely on public and community transport in remote and rural areas. And we will also hear, I hope, of the courage of drivers and of staff who kept essential bus services going during the height of the pandemic and since. These real, local and Wales-wide experiences will be good to hear in this Senedd. But I hope we'll also have time to focus on the way forward for Wales, for every part of Wales, which must involve truly radical reform too, and innovation and investment in our buses, scheduled buses and flexi buses and on-demand buses, but also a far greater integration of different types of public and community transport, streamlined timetables and ticketing, a step change in modal shift from individual to communal transport and to active travel wherever possible too, helping to tackle climate change, lessening the need for longer travel too by creating local communities with jobs and services and retail and opportunities to socialise in easy travelable distance by foot or by bike. But let us begin with buses, because I suspect that's what many people will want to hear about. I won't be alone in having witnessed many cuts to services over recent years, and the cuts have often fallen hardest on the most remote communities, and often communities with already existing significant disadvantage. The beautiful tops of my valleys, the hilltops in my valleys, they're often former coal mining communities and social housing estates. They're also often poorly served by shops and health provision and job opportunities and clubs and community centres in which to mix and socialise. They're often where car ownership is lowest and where the residents are often older and less well and less mobile. Yet these are the very communities, so often the ones where the cuts are seen first, and often those cuts come first as temporary because of reported problems with navigating narrow streets with parked cars for buses, or damage to buses, or antisocial behaviour, or because of the pandemic. But so often, these cuts become permanent. Despite representations from local people and local representatives, sometimes the cuts, we are told, come because the route just isn't profitable. Yet buses and public transport have a true social and economic purpose. They connect people and communities. Without buses, we have isolated communities and isolated people, with all the ills that that brings for them individually and for society. We cannot reduce buses simply to a transaction of money for a ticket or to cold calculations of short-term profitability on different routes. They are more than that. As Marion and Keith in Cairo said to the BBC last night, they are the lifeline for people to meet their friends, get to the doctor or hospital, get to work and be part of their wider community. Without them, communities are isolated and alone, and so are individuals. So in this sixth Senedd, we have the opportunity now to do things very differently. Now that we have the powers, we need to restore the public and social purpose to the very heart of all public and community transport, as we've already begun to do with trains. And this means putting people, transport users and locally elected representatives back in control of our buses and of the wider oversight of public transport, so that buses and trains and flexi-buses and on-demand buses and community transport work effectively together, and where no one is left without being connected to their wider community and the world of work and the world of their friends and of society. Despite the pandemic, or perhaps because of it, that work has already begun. The bus service agreement of March 2021 has committed over £37 million of funding to continue to support the bus industry in the coming financial year, but this is conditional on, in quotes, a fundamental reshaping of local bus services, better meeting the needs of passengers. And it also seeks to rebuild patronage post-COVID, encourage and increase in numbers to use public transport over time for a wide range of journeys. That's good. And it's encouraging to see ministers seizing the opportunity to reshape the way we do bus transport already. The bold announcement yesterday on the pause and review of road building also had a welcome focus on shifting investment into buses and public transport. That's good. But there is much more to do, much more. Llwybr Newydd, the Wales Transport Strategy 2021, sets a clear and new radical direction to take on bus transport and local transport connectivity. It contains a range of commitments which include extending the reach of bus services, not shrinking but extending, progressing the new bus legislation which we've consulted on already to give the public sector more control over local bus services, delivering innovative, more flexible bus services in partnership with local authorities, with commercial and with third sectors, says the chair of the Cooperative Party, and ensuring that bus services and facilities are accessible, attractive and safe for everyone. They are the go-to choice, not a leftover option. Now, this is truly exciting for many of us. This sees a new future for buses, which puts them at the heart of local and regional transport policy, and it puts people back at the heart of those local services with greater control over local routes and times and more, with a point of principle that, in quotes, bus services and facilities are accessible, attractive and safe for everyone. So how do we then put people and bus users back at the heart of public transport? We do it by using the new powers this Senedd now has, by putting a modern Welsh form of re-regulation of buses and public transport in place, and by recognising that buses and public transport have a fundamental social and public purpose. We democratise buses again. Now, we don't start from a blank sheet. We start from a real world of several decades of post-deregulation bus services. And we start from acknowledging the skills and expertise that are out there in the current operators. And some of the investment, albeit greatly driven by government investment and regulation, in modern and accessible vehicles in parts of the network. And we also acknowledge the commitment and experience of the drivers and the staff who've kept this service running through the pandemic too. But I say, if London and Liverpool can have greater democratic control of and greater integration of buses and other forms of public transport, integrating ticketing and cheaper tickets, routes and services going more frequently when and where the public want them to go, then why not us? And if commercial operators can provide these services, then, as in a few select places of the UK and actually many worldwide, then so can local and regional and municipal authorities and not-for-profit mutuals and social enterprises too. If they can have greater investment in buses with a longer-term funding horizon, ultra-low emission buses, fully accessible at that, if we can shift funding and passengers to climate-friendly mass transit rather than individual transport, and we can improve working conditions and attractiveness of the sector for drivers, I say, if it's good enough for London and it's good enough for Liverpool, then it's good enough for Lewistown in Ogmore, and it's good enough for Lalliston in Bridgend, or for Llanelli and Llandudno and anywhere else in Wales for that matter too. So let's be bold in reimagining the future of buses and integrated transport in Wales. I'm looking forward in this debate to hear other members of the Sened's views on the future of buses and integrated transport in Wales, and the response of the Minister to this debate shortly, as I hope he will set out a bus timetable for delivering this exciting and radical transformation. And Llwybr Newydd, I will only require a short time at the end to respond. Thank you. Diolch Llwybr Newydd, and I said I'd keep it under a minute, and I will indeed. I want to thank I think we've had 10 contributors to this debate, and I, like the Minister, am encouraged by the degree of consensus around the need for additional investment, greater planning, by and large from people, about putting the control back to local people and local authorities so they have a say on where these routes run and the times of the day that they do as well. Greater collaboration, less competition, wasteful competition, I think is a theme we might have different ways of how to take that forward, but I think that will be a theme as well. Minister, you asked the question in your closing remarks. I can't turn to everybody's contribution, I'm afraid, in a minute, but you asked the question, do we have the courage? I think we have to have the courage. In order to shift investment into multimodal transport, we have to have the willingness to actually say honestly how that will be done. If we're going to talk about taking back control, we have to be honest with people about how to do it. But I would say in closing, it's to do with partnership. We've learned so much about how to do this well during the pandemic. In building back fairer, and this is a social justice and a climate justice issues, we will do it together and with the support of people in this chamber. You have the backing of the chamber to do this, I think.
Y cwestiwn yw a ddylid derbyn y cynnig. A oes unrhyw aelod yn gwrthwynebu? Nope. Felly dibynnu'r cynnig yn unol a reol sefydlog 12.36.